Commander Zextar checked his weapon one last time as the transport ship approached Earth's surface. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from space, almost beautiful. He had read all the reports about humans. They were a young species with simple weapons and basic technology. The hegemony military computers said this would be an easy victory. Zextar had fought in 12 wars across the galaxy. He had seen species surrender after the first orbital attack. Others fought bravely for a few days before accepting defeat. Earth should be no different. The humans had nuclear weapons, but they were crude and slow. Their armies used metal bullets instead of energy weapons. Their armor was just thick fabric and metal plates. The landing zone was a human city called Colorado Springs. From the air, Zextar could see the damage from their bombardment. Smoke rose from broken buildings. Streets were cracked and filled with rubble. Some humans ran between the ruins, but most had already fled or died. The first human soldier they found was trapped in what the intelligence files called a shopping mall. The building was half destroyed, with glass and concrete scattered everywhere. Zextar's squad of 8 warriors surrounded the area. Their heat sensors showed one human inside, alone and cut off from any help. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was 22 years old, though Zextar did not know this yet. Morrison had been separated from his unit when the alien ships first attacked. He had been hiding in the mall for 2 days, surviving on food from damaged stores and water from broken pipes. His radio was dead. His ammunition was running low. He knew no help was coming. Zextar activated his translator and called out to the human, "You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. You will not be harmed if you surrender." The response came back in clear English. "Yeah, I don't think so." This surprised Zextar. Most species tried to negotiate when facing impossible odds. They asked about terms of surrender or begged for mercy. This human sounded almost amused. "Your position is hopeless," Zextar continued. "We have superior weapons and armor. Your military has been defeated. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to galactic law." Laughter echoed from inside the mall. Actual laughter. Zextar had never heard a cornered enemy laugh before. "Hey, alien guy," Morrison called out. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" Zextar was curious despite himself. "What difference? You're trying to capture me alive. I'm trying to kill as many of you as possible before I die." The words sent a chill through Zextar's squad. This was not how rational beings behaved. A trapped soldier should want to live, not die fighting. Morrison appeared at a broken window on the 2nd floor. He was young-looking, with short brown hair and a face covered in dust and small cuts. His uniform was torn and dirty. Blood stained his left arm. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. "I counted 8 heat signatures out there," Morrison said, holding up a small metal object. "Fragmentation grenade. Got 6 more just like it." Zextar raised his plasma rifle, but Morrison had already ducked back inside. The human was moving through the building, using the broken walls and collapsed ceiling for cover. Zextar's squad tried to track him with their sensors, but the human seemed to know exactly where they were looking. "Spread out," Zextar ordered his warriors. "Surround the building. Use stun weapons only. Command wants prisoners for interrogation." That was their first mistake. Zextar would realize this later when he was writing his report. They were thinking like civilized soldiers trying to capture an enemy combatant. Morrison was thinking like a predator hunting prey. The human struck from an unexpected angle. While Zextar's squad focused on the main entrances, Morrison blasted through a weakened wall on the east side. He came out firing his primitive kinetic weapon, the bullets somehow finding gaps in their advanced armor. 2 warriors went down immediately. Their shields flickered and failed under the sustained gunfire. Morrison rolled behind a chunk of concrete as plasma bolts scorched the air where he had been standing. "He's just one human." Warrior Kexvolume shouted into the cum. How is he doing this? Morrison answered by throwing one of his grenades. The explosion was crude compared to hegemony weapons, but it was perfectly placed. Shrapnel tore through gaps. In their formation, another warrior fell, his armor cracked in leaking atmosphere, but the blast had also caught Morrison. The human was thrown against a wall, his left leg clearly broken. Dark red blood ran down his face. Any rational being would surrender now wounded and outgunned. Morrison pulled out another grenade. You want to know why humans are dangerous? He called out, his voice strained but steady. We don't fight to win. We fight to make you regret starting the fight in the first place. Zextar finally understood. This human was not trying to escape or survive. He was trying to inflict maximum damage before dying. The concept was alien to hegemony thinking. Their military doctrine focused on victory with minimal losses. Soldiers who could not win were expected to surrender and live to fight another day. Humans apparently had different ideas about acceptable losses. Morrison detonated 2 more grenades in quick succession. The explosions brought down part of the mall's remaining structure. Concrete and steel rained down on the battlefield. Through the dust and smoke, Zextar could hear the humans still moving, still fighting. By the time the engagement ended, Morrison had killed 3 experienced hegemony warriors and wounded 2 others. He had used 7 grenades, 43 bullets, and a piece of broken glass as weapons. He had fought for 80 minutes with a broken leg, internal bleeding, and what their medical scanners later identified as a severe concussion. When they finally found Morrison's body in the rubble, he was still holding a grenade with the pin pulled. Even in death, he was trying to take more enemies with him. Zextar knelt beside the fallen human and tried to understand what he had witnessed. This had been one soldier, barely an adult by human standards, armed with primitive weapons, and facing impossible odds. Yet he had fought like 10 warriors, turning his certain death into a tactical victory against superior forces. The intelligence reports had been wrong. Humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that had weaponized the concept of acceptable losses. As Zextar called for medical evacuation for his wounded warriors, he realized that the conquest of Earth was going to be much more difficult than anyone had predicted. 3 weeks after the mall incident, Commander Zextar stood on the deck of the command ship looking down at New York City. The massive human settlement stretched across the land like a concrete jungle. Millions of humans lived in those tall buildings. The hegemony fleet had expected them to evacuate or surrender when the orbital bombardment began. Instead, they stayed and fought. The siege had been going on for 14 days now. 14 days. In Zextar's experience, most cities fell within hours once their defenses were broken. The humans had no orbital weapons, no energy shields, no way to stop the hegemony fleet from destroying them completely. Yet they continued fighting street by street, building by building. Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the human. Commander, Communications Officer Vextar reported. ZEX single quotes, Tar side. The human leader had been sending the same message every day. He activated the screen and saw Captain Lisa Rodriguez again. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes. Her uniform was dirty and torn. Behind her, Zextar could see other humans moving through what looked like an underground tunnel. This is Captain Rodriguez of the New York Defense Force, she said in clear, calm English. I'm sending you our daily casualty report and requesting medical supplies for our wounded. This confused Zextar every time. Rodriguez spoke as if she were negotiating with an equal, not a conquered enemy. She asked for supplies but never offered surrender. She reported her losses but showed no sign of giving up despite terrible odds. Captain Rodriguez, Zextar replied through the translator. Your situation is hopeless. We control the air and space around your city. Our ground forces outnumber yours 50-1. Why do you continue this pointless resistance?" Rodriguez smiled. It was not a happy smile. "Because this is our home, Commander, and we don't give up our homes easily." She cut the transmission without waiting for a reply. This also frustrated Zexstar. Most enemy commanders wanted to negotiate, to find some way to save their people. Rodriguez acted like she was running a business, not fighting a war she could not win. The truth was even stranger than Zexstar realized. Rodriguez had been planning the defense of New York for months before the invasion began. She had studied every urban warfare manual in human military history. She had walked every street, mapped every building, and identified every possible advantage. But Rodriguez was also dying. The cancer had started in her lungs 6 months ago. Human medical technology could slow it down but not stop it. She had maybe 3 months to live, possibly less with the stress of combat. Her officers knew this. Her soldiers knew this. She had told them all because she believed they deserved the truth. Instead of replacing her, they had decided to follow her to the end. "Ma'am, sensors show enemy movement in Sector 7, Sergeant Kevin Baker reported. He was young, maybe 19. Years old, with red hair and freckles. He should have been in college, not fighting aliens in subway tunnels. How many?" Rodriguez asked, studying the map spread across a broken table. "Looks like a full company. About 200 troops with heavy weapons." Rodriguez nodded and marked the location. "They're trying to flank our position at Times Square. Alert Lieutenant Chun to pull her people back to the secondary line." This was how Rodriguez fought. She never tried to win big battles. Instead, she made every block cost the aliens more than it was worth. She turned the entire city into a maze of traps and ambushes. When the aliens took a building, they found it booby-trapped. When they secured a street, snipers appeared on rooftops 3 blocks away. The humans had flooded the subway system in some areas and electrified it in others. They had rigged office buildings to collapse when aliens reached certain floors. They had somehow convinced the civilian population to act as spotters and messengers, creating an intelligence network that seemed to know where every alien patrol was going before they got there. "Ma'am, you need to take your medication, Corporal," Janet Wells said quietly. Wells was Rodriguez's aide, a young woman who had been a nurse before the war started. Rodriguez looked at the pills in Wells' hand. They would help with the pain and keep her conscious for a few more hours. But they also made her thinking slower and less sharp. Every day she had to choose between feeling better and commanding effectively. After the briefing, Rodriguez said, "I need to be clear for this." This was the part that terrified Zexstar when he learned about it later. Rodriguez was fighting a war while her own body was dying. She was using drugs and willpower to stay functional while making life-and-death decisions for thousands of people. Any rational being would have stepped down and let someone healthy take command. Rodriguez saw it differently. She had trained for this job her entire adult life. Her people needed her experience and knowledge. Personal comfort was not as important as duty. The aliens had superior technology and overwhelming numbers. But they were fighting an enemy who treated physical limitations as just another tactical problem to solve. "Enemy forces are moving into the financial district," Baker reported. "They're using the same approach pattern as yesterday." Rodriguez smiled her grim smile. "Good. That means they're walking into Trap Zone Charlie. Signal all units to execute." Plan 7. What happened next became required study material at the Hegemony War College, though not for the reasons Rodriguez intended. The human defense of the financial district should have been impossible. Outnumbered 20-1, armed with primitive weapons, fighting from damaged buildings, against an enemy with air support. The humans won anyway. They had turned the narrow streets into kill zones. Office windows became sniper positions. Subway. Entrances became bunkers. Every doorway and alley was a potential ambush site. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Rodriguez coordinated the entire battle from a basement command post, using radios and runners to communicate with units scattered across 20 city blocks. She moved forces like pieces on a chessboard, always staying one step ahead of alien tactics. But the effort was killing her faster than the cancer. "Ma'am, medical says your blood pressure is critical," Wells whispered during a brief pause in the fighting. Rodriguez looked at the tactical display showing alien forces retreating from the financial district. Her people had held. They had actually pushed back an alien assault with superior firepower and training. "How long?" she asked. "Doctor Patterson says maybe 12 hours if you keep pushing this hard." Rodriguez nodded and turned back to the radio. "All units, this is Rodriguez. Excellent work today. Prepare for enemy counterattack at dawn. Get some rest while you can." She died at her command post 6 days later, still wearing her uniform, still holding a radio. Her last words were tactical instructions for defending the Brooklyn Bridge. The humans continued following her battle plans for another week, fighting exactly as she had taught them. When Zextar finally ordered the withdrawal from New York, Rodriguez had been dead for 5 days, but her strategic thinking was still winning battles. Zextar had conquered 12 worlds, but he had never fought an enemy who could weaponize their own death so effectively. 2 months into the occupation, Commander Zextar had been promoted to oversee what the hegemony called pacification operations in the American Midwest. The term sounded clean and official, but the reality was much uglier. Human resistance. Groups were attacking supply lines, communication centers, and isolated patrols. What should have been a simple cleanup operation had become a nightmare of guerrilla warfare. The worst part was not knowing who the enemy was. Humans all looked similar to alien eyes. A farmer might be innocent, or he might be planning to blow up a supply convoy. A shopkeeper could be selling food, or she could be passing intelligence to resistance fighters. Even human children seemed to be part of the war effort, carrying messages and watching alien movements. Zextar was studying casualty reports in his temporary headquarters when Lieutenant Kexmo entered with urgent news. "Sir, we captured a human resistance leader during the raid on Kansas City. Intelligence says he has information about weapons caches and safe houses throughout the region." This was good news. The hegemony had been trying to break the resistance networks for weeks. Human prisoners usually said nothing useful, even under interrogation. Perhaps this one would be different. "What is his rank and position?" Zextar asked. "Sergeant Danny Walsh, former military, now leading a civilian resistance. Cell. He says he wants to cooperate." Zextar was suspicious. Humans who wanted to cooperate usually had hidden motives. But he needed intelligence badly. His forces were taking losses every day to attacks they could not predict or prevent. The interrogation room was small and plain, with metal walls and bright lights. Danny Walsh sat at a simple table, his hands secured but not uncomfortable. He was a large man, maybe 40 years old, with gray hair and calm blue eyes. He did not look afraid or angry. He looked almost relaxed. "Sergeant Walsh," Zextar began, "you have requested to provide information about resistance activities. Why?" Walsh shrugged. "This war is over. Your people won. My people are dying for nothing. Maybe I can save some lives by being practical." About the situation. This sounded reasonable. Walsh spoke in a tired, defeated tone that suggested genuine surrender. Zextar activated the recording device and began asking detailed questions. Walsh was remarkably helpful. He provided names, locations, and dates. He described weapons caches hidden in barns and basements. He explained how resistance cells communicated, using code words and dead drops. He even drew maps showing safe routes that government officials had used to evacuate important personnel. There's a major arms depot hidden in a grain silo 15 kilometers north of Topeka, Walsh said, marking the location on a tactical map. About 200 rifles, ammunition, explosives. The local cell was planning to use it for an attack on your supply base. Zextar made careful notes. This information could save alien lives and end resistance operations across 3 states. Walsh seemed genuinely committed to cooperation. What about communication networks? Zextar asked. How do the different cells coordinate their activities? Hem radio operators, Walsh replied. Amateur radio enthusiasts. They use old equipment that's hard to detect. I can give you frequencies and call signs. The interrogation continued for hours. Walsh answered every question with detailed, specific information. He never hesitated or tried to avoid sensitive topics. He even volunteered additional details that Zextar had not thought to ask about. It was too easy. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. The Hegemony Patrol investigating the grain silo Walsh had described was ambushed by human fighters using advanced weapons. All 12 alien soldiers died in the attack. The arms depot had been empty except for a bomb that destroyed the building, and everyone inside it. The second incident happened when alien forces raided a farmhouse Walsh had identified as a resistance safe house. Instead of finding hidden fighters, they walked into a carefully prepared kill zone. Automatic weapons opened fire from concealed positions. Explosives buried in the road disabled their vehicles. Only 2 aliens survived to report what had happened. Every piece of information Walsh had provided led to disaster. Zex single quotes Tar realized the truth while reviewing the interrogation recordings. Walsh had never actually surrendered. He had volunteered to be captured. Every word he spoke was carefully designed to lead hegemony forces into traps prepared by his own people. The human had allowed himself to be taken prisoner specifically to spread false intelligence. Bring Walsh back for questioning, Zextar ordered. When the guards brought Walsh into the interrogation room again, he was still calm and relaxed. If anything, he seemed amused. Having some problems with my information, Commander? Walsh asked with a slight smile. You lied to us. Every location you provided was a trap. You knew we would investigate your claims and walk into ambushes. Walsh nodded. That was the plan, yes. You sacrificed yourself to kill my soldiers? I bought my people time, Walsh corrected. Every patrol you sent to investigate my stories was a patrol that wasn't hunting real resistance cells. Every day you spent checking fake intelligence was another day for families to evacuate and fighters to reposition. Zextar was beginning to understand the scope of the deception. Walsh had not just lied about specific locations. He had created an entire false picture of human resistance operations, leading the aliens to waste time and resources chasing phantoms, while the real enemy escaped. You knew we would execute you when we discovered the truth, Zextar said. Probably, Walsh agreed. But I figured that was acceptable cost for what I accomplished. Acceptable cost. Walsh leaned back in his chair. Commander, how long did I keep your forces busy chasing my fake intelligence? Zextar checked his records. 11 days. 11 days. In that time, how many real resistance operations did you uncover? The answer was 0. While Zextar's forces investigated Walsh's false information, actual resistance cells had relocated, received new supplies, and planned fresh attacks. You understand that cooperation would have earned you better treatment, Zextar said. Real information might have led to your release, Walsh laughed. Commander, you're occupying my country and killing my people. Did you really think I was going to help you do it more efficiently? This was the moment Zextar truly understood how dangerous humans were. Other species fought with weapons and tactics. Humans weaponized truth itself. They could turn cooperation into resistance, surrender into attack, and helpful information into deadly traps. Walsh had demonstrated that even captured and helpless, a human could continue fighting. He had used the aliens' own intelligence gathering process against them, turning their strength into weakness. "What you did was dishonest," Zextar said, though he was not sure why this mattered. "What you're doing is invading my planet," Walsh replied. "I think that makes us even." The execution took place the following morning. Walsh faced the firing squad without blindfold or restraints. His last words were transmitted to human resistance networks throughout the region. "Tell them Danny Walsh bought you 11 days. Make them count." Zextar watched the execution and tried to understand what he had witnessed. Walsh had died for information that was completely false. But his false information had been more valuable than the truth would have been. He had turned his own death into a tactical victory. The interrogation recordings became required viewing for all hegemony intelligence officers, not as training material, but as a warning. The humans could weaponize anything, even their own willingness to help. The Battle of Denver began at dawn on the 97th day of the occupation. Commander Zextar watched from his command ship as human forces launched what should have been a suicide attack against overwhelming odds. The humans had gathered every available fighter from across the Rocky Mountain region for one final push against the hegemony occupation forces. Colonel Pete Harrison led the assault personally, driving an old human tank at the head of a column that included regular soldiers, weekend warriors from something called the National Guard, armed civilians, and even teenagers operating radio equipment. By all military logic, this attack should have failed within the first hour. Instead, it lasted 3 days and nearly drove the aliens from the city. Zextar had studied Harrison's background after capturing intelligence reports about the human commander. Harrison was 52 years old, a career soldier who had fought in multiple human conflicts before the alien invasion. Unlike the younger officers Zextar had encountered, Harrison seemed to understand warfare as both art and science. What made Harrison truly dangerous was his attitude toward acceptable losses. "Sir, the human assault force is accepting casualty rates above 60%. Intelligence Officer Mextar reported. Their attack should have collapsed by now." Zextar checked the tactical display. Human forces were indeed suffering terrible losses. Entire units had been wiped out by plasma artillery. Their primitive vehicles burned in the streets. Bodies lay scattered across the battlefield, yet they kept attacking. "Harrison is using his people like ammunition," Zextar observed. "He spends lives like we spend energy charges." This was not quite accurate, though Zextar would not understand the difference until later. Harrison was not wasting his soldiers' lives carelessly. He was calculating the value of each sacrifice against strategic objectives. Every human death served a purpose in his larger battle plan. The first breakthrough came when a squad of teenage fighters used themselves as bait to draw alien forces into an ambush. The kids ran straight toward a hegemony position, appearing to panic and flee randomly. When the aliens moved to capture them, Harrison's hidden artillery opened fire on the concentrated enemy forces. All 6 teenagers died in the crossfire, but their sacrifice eliminated an entire alien company. Why would they do this? "Warrior," Texbar asked over the communications channel. "Those were juveniles, not even fully grown." Zextar had no answer. The human children had volunteered for the mission, knowing they would die. They had seemed almost eager to sacrifice themselves for the chance to damage alien forces. The pattern repeated throughout the battle. Human fighters would accept missions with 0 survival probability if those missions achieved tactical objectives. They fought with the desperate intensity of creatures defending their young, but also with the cold calculation of experienced warriors who understood the mathematics of warfare. On the second day, Harrison himself appeared on the battlefield. During a particularly fierce engagement, He was driving a damaged vehicle and carrying what appeared to be a primitive communication device. Zexstar ordered his forces to capture the human commander alive. Harrison had other plans. The human colonel parked his vehicle in the middle of the fighting and began directing artillery fire using his radio. He was completely exposed, standing on top of his damaged transport, while plasma bolts scorched the air around him. Any rational being would have taken cover or retreated to a safer position. Harrison used himself as a target to draw alien fire away from his advancing troops. "All units, this is Harrison." His voice came over the intercepted radio channels. "I'm painting targets with laser designation. When you see my beam, fire everything you have." What followed was the most precise artillery barrage Zexstar had ever witnessed from human forces. Harrison stood in the open, using a handheld device to mark alien positions, while his artillery units destroyed them one by one. He was trading his personal safety for tactical accuracy. The bombardment lasted 18 minutes. Harrison survived by constantly moving and using the wreckage of vehicles for momentary cover. When it ended, 2 full companies of hegemony forces had been eliminated. "Sir, request permission to target the human commander directly. Weapons." Officer Dexter requested. "Denied," Zexstar replied. "I want to speak with him first." The ceasefire lasted exactly 30 minutes. Both sides used the time to reposition forces and treat their wounded. Zexstar met Harrison in a damaged building that had once been some kind of human retail establishment. Harrison looked exactly like what he was, a professional soldier who had been fighting for 3 straight days. His uniform was torn and dirty. Dried blood covered small wounds on his face and hands. His eyes were tired but alert. He carried his primitive kinetic weapon casually, as if it were part of his body. "Colonel Harrison," Zexstar said through his translator, "your position is hopeless. My orbital weapons can destroy this entire area. Why do you continue fighting?" Harrison sat down on a piece of broken concrete and studied Zexstar with curious eyes. "You know, Commander, that's an interesting question. Want to know the real answer? Please." "We've been fighting each other for our entire history," Harrison sighed. "Thousands of years of constant warfare. We've gotten very good at it." This confused Zexstar. "Your species fights itself all the time. World wars, civil wars, tribal conflicts, religious disputes. We've developed warfare into both an art and a science. We study every possible type of combat, from individual hand-to-hand fighting to global thermonuclear exchange." Harrison gestured toward the destroyed city around them. "You see this as a hopeless last stand. I see it as just another type of military problem to solve." "But you cannot win," Zexstar pointed out. "We have superior technology and unlimited reinforcements." "Define winning," Harrison replied. "If winning means driving you off Earth completely, then you're probably right. But if winning means making this conquest so expensive that you never try it again, well, that's a different calculation." This was when Zexstar began to understand the true scope of human military thinking. Harrison was not trying to achieve total victory. He was trying to make the cost of occupation higher than its benefits. "You are deliberately accepting massive casualties to inflict smaller losses on us," Zexstar said. "Cost-benefit analysis," Harrison agreed. "We're making you pay a price for every mile of ground, every day of occupation, every strategic objective. Eventually, your leadership will decide Earth isn't worth the expense." Harrison stood up and shouldered his weapon. "Plus, there's something else you should know about humans." "What? We actually enjoy this stuff." Harrison's grin was genuinely disturbing. "Fighting is what we do best. It's what we've always done. Some of my people are actually disappointed when wars end." The ceasefire ended and the battle resumed. Harrison died 4 hours later when his position was overrun by hegemony forces. His last radio transmission was tactical coordinates for an artillery strike on his own location. The withdrawal order came 6 days after the Battle of Denver ended. Official hegemony records listed the Earth campaign as strategically non-viable due to resource expenditure ratios. The truth was simpler. They had encountered a species that treated warfare as a natural extension of existence. Years later, Zexstar would tell younger officers that humans were the only species he had met who seemed genuinely disappointed when conflicts ended. They did not fight because they had to. They fought because some fundamental part of their psychology found warfare intellectually stimulating. Earth was added to the list of worlds never to be contacted again. The official designation was Quarantine Zone, Dangerous Predatory Species. Unofficially, hegemony military personnel referred to it as the planet where war itself lives. Zexstar kept Harrison's final radio transmission in his personal files. As a reminder, sometimes he would listen to it and try to understand what kind of species could transform their own death into tactical advantage. So casually, he never figured it out.